Sergeant Almeida's face, once red with rage and arrogance, instantly paled, turning a cadaverous white. His eyes widened, fixed on the badge. The voice that had roared moments before now barely managed a whisper. "Internal Affairs Officer. I didn't know." Ana Lucia put away her badge, her expression serious. "Didn't know or didn't care? Sergeant, you are under arrest. And rest assured, your police career ends here. Take him away and provide immediate assistance to Mrs. Aurora." Two officers accompanying the Internal Affairs Officer, until then discreet, approached and handcuffed Sergeant Almeida, who, humiliated and in shock, was led away under the disapproving glares of the small crowd. Mrs. Aurora, with tear-filled eyes, watched justice being served. The small crowd, previously paralyzed by the drama, began to disperse, whispering among themselves, their gazes still fixed on the spot where Sergeant Almeida had been taken. The fine rain persisted, washing the asphalt and, in a way, the tension that hung in the air. Mrs. Aurora for an instant remained motionless, her tear-filled eyes slowly drying, replaced by a quietude that was not relief, but a cold, calculated determination. The expression of vulnerability that had accompanied her throughout the incident vanished like smoke, revealing a face carved from granite, where every line seemed to tell a story of command and resilience. Internal Affairs Officer Ana Lucia, after ensuring Almeida was in custody and that assistance for Mrs. Aurora's vehicle would be provided, turned to the woman. There was an immediate respect in her approach, an unconscious reverence that went beyond the simple fulfillment of her duty. "Mrs. Aurora, are you all right?" Ana Lucia asked, her voice soft but professional. Mrs. Aurora nodded, an almost imperceptible movement. Her eyes, previously filled with silent pain, now gleamed with an intensity that made Ana Lucia catch her breath. It was not the intensity of a victim, but that of a predator who had just assessed the battlefield. "I am perfectly fine, Internal Affairs Officer, and I appreciate your intervention. It was opportune." The word opportune was spoken with a weight that suggested much more than simple gratitude. Ana Lucia felt a shiver. There was something in that woman's posture, in the way she composed herself, that didn't fit the image of a defenseless lady by the roadside. She had seen many faces, many reactions, but this transition was unique. "My duty, ma'am. No one deserves to be treated that way." A cold, brief smile touched Mrs. Aurora's lips. Duty, an interesting word, Internal Affairs Officer, and one many seem to have forgotten. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them. The Internal Affairs Officer instinctively recoiled a millimeter, feeling the aura of authority emanating from the other woman. "Allow me a correction, Officer Lucia. My name is Aurora, Colonel Aurora Vance." The name echoed in the humid highway air. Colonel Aurora Vance. The name that, in certain military and intelligence circles, was whispered with the same reverence and dread reserved for a living legend. Internal Affairs Officer Ana Lucia felt her blood run cold. The face she had previously seen as that of a victim now reconfigured in her mind into one of the most feared and respected figures in the Pentagon, a strategist whose reputation preceded any encounter. "Colonel Vance," Ana Lucia managed to stammer, her voice failing. The badge she had just put away seemed insignificant before the imposing presence in front of her. I didn't know. My deepest apologies, Colonel." Aurora Vance raised a hand, interrupting the apologies. "No need, Internal Affairs Officer. My intention was precisely that, to observe. And what I observed was instructive." Her eyes swept the highway, the grey landscape, and then fixed on Ana Lucia again. Sergeant Almeida was merely a symptom, a parasite in a larger body. His arrest was the first step, but the surgery isn't over yet. Internal Affairs Officer Ana Lucia, still in shock, merely nodded, unable to formulate a coherent response. Colonel Vance took a small satellite communicator from the inner pocket of her soaked coat. The device, of advanced military technology, seemed out of place in her hands, but she handled it with the familiarity of someone wielding a weapon. "Alpha 1 to Central Command," she said, her voice now grave and unwavering, cutting through the rain's silence. "Situation stabilized at the interception point, primary target contained by local forces, initiating Phase 2 of Operation Silent Storm." Ana Lucia watched agape as Colonel Vance continued. "Requesting approach vector for extraction and transport. Maximum priority. And prepare the intelligence team for immediate interrogation of the detainee. We need to know who else is involved in this corruption network." From the communicator, a robotic, calm voice replied, "Central Command received Alpha 1. Approach vector in progress. Estimated time of arrival, 3 minutes. Confirm need for additional aerial support for area sweep." Aurora Vance looked at the grey sky, a flash of satisfaction in her eyes. "Confirmed. Bring in the Guardian Angel. I want everyone to know the storm hasn't passed. It's only just begun." The distant but growing sound of rotors cutting through the air began to be heard, a hum that quickly transformed into a deafening roar, breaking the highway's quiet. Ana Lucia looked up, and what she saw on the horizon sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the rain. A dark and imposing silhouette, an attack helicopter, emerged from the low clouds, its navigation lights blinking like the eyes of a metallic monster. It was not a rescue helicopter, nor a patrol one. It was a war machine, coming directly from the heart of military power, and its destination was that forgotten highway. Colonel Aurora Vance wasn't just asking for a ride, she was summoning a symbol of her authority, ready to issue an arrest that would be heard far beyond the limits of that road. Justice for Sergeant Almeida had been merely the prelude. The real hunt was about to begin. The roar of the rotors tore through the air, drowning out the sound of the rain and the distant highway hum. It wasn't the familiar sound of a rescue or police helicopter. It was a deeper, heavier sound that vibrated in her chest and made the asphalt tremble. Ana Lucia looked up, shielding her eyes from the rain that now seemed to lash her face with greater intensity, driven by the wind that was beginning to form. The silhouette that emerged from the low clouds wasn't just dark, it was menacing. An attack helicopter, an AH-64 Apache, or something very similar in its lethality and design, hovered a few dozen meters above the road. Its red and green navigation lights pulsed like the hungry eyes of a metallic creature, and the searchlight, a powerful cold beam, swept the scene, illuminating the Internal Affairs Officer, Colonel Vance, and the spot where Mrs. Aurora's car was stopped. The wind generated by the rotor blades was a brutal force, whipping the rain and kicking up dust and debris from the roadside. Ana Lucia's hair flew wildly, and she had to brace her feet to keep from being unbalanced. In the center of that artificial hurricane, Colonel Aurora Vance remained unyielding. Her eyes, previously fixed on the sky, now swept the highway with a disturbing calm, as if the war helicopter were merely a private taxi. The rain soaked her coat, but she seemed to feel neither the cold nor the dampness. Her posture was that of someone who commanded not only the situation, but the very weather. "Colonel Vance!" Ana Lucia tried to shout, but her voice was swallowed by the deafening noise. She felt a mixture of terror and fascination. The woman who minutes before had seemed a defenseless victim was in fact a force of nature, capable of bending reality to her will. The Internal Affairs Officer, accustomed to dealing with bureaucracy and corruption at more mundane levels, was now faced with a display of power that transcended anything she had ever seen. The helicopter slowly descended, hovering a few meters from the ground, creating a storm of wind and water. A side door opened, and a soldier in full tactical gear and night vision goggles slid down a rope, landing with the precision of a feline. Two others followed, forming a security perimeter in seconds. They were machines, efficient and silent in their movements, despite the infernal noise. The first soldier, who appeared to be the leader of the extraction team, approached Colonel Vance, saluting. Alpha 1, extraction team on site, ready for boarding and transport. Confirm need for area sweep. Ma'am. Aurora Vance nodded without taking her eyes off Ana Lucia. That gaze was an invitation, an intimation. Confirmed, Sergeant. I want the Guardian Angel to perform a full sweep within a 10-kilometer radius of this position. Any stopped vehicle or suspicious movement must be reported immediately, and I want the message to be clear. The party's over. Internal Affairs Officer Ana Lucia swallowed hard. The party's over. The phrase echoed in her mind, laden with a weight that went far beyond the arrest of a corrupt sergeant. It was a declaration of war. Vance finally turned to Ana Lucia, her expression serious, but with an almost imperceptible glint of approval in her eyes. Officer Lucia, your intervention was crucial. Sergeant Almeida is just a small piece, but the way he acted, the impunity he felt, is a reflection of a larger sickness. She gestured towards the helicopter. This isn't just an extraction, it's a demonstration. A voice of arrest that won't just be heard by Almeida, but by all who benefit from this rotten system. The leader of the extraction team, who had stepped away to give orders via radio, returned. Alpha 1, area sweep in progress. The Guardian Angel is in patrol mode. Any additional instructions for the detainee, ma'am? Aurora Vance looked at the spot where Sergeant Almeida had been taken. Yes, ensure he is interrogated with utmost urgency. I want names, dates, locations. I want to know who else is involved in this extortion and corruption network, and I want him to know that Internal Affairs Officer Lucia was responsible for his arrest. Let him not forget her face. The last sentence was spoken with calculated coldness, a veiled warning that Ana Lucia, whether she liked it or not, was now neck-deep in this. Ana Lucia felt a chill run down her spine. Colonel Vance had not only dragged her into the center of her operation, but had also transformed her into a symbol, a potential target. It was a heavy burden, but strangely, also an empowerment. Colonel, what exactly is Operation Silent Storm? Ana Lucia managed to ask, her voice still a little shaky. Vance walked towards the open helicopter door, the extraction team soldiers already in position for boarding. She paused at the entrance, looking at the internal affairs officer one last time. The rotor wash whipped her hair, but her gaze remained firm and penetrating. It's the cleansing. It's the removal of the parasites that corrode institutions from within. Sergeant Almeida was just the first. There are many others, and we won't stop until the last of them is exposed and neutralized. She paused, and a cold, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. You, Officer Lucia, have just become a crucial piece in this storm. Be prepared, because what comes next will make today's incident seem like a summer breeze. With those words, Colonel Aurora Vance climbed into the helicopter. The soldiers followed her, and the door slid shut with a dull thud. The engine's roar intensified, and the Guardian Angel began to ascend, slowly circling above the highway. Its searchlights swept the landscape one last time before it tilted and rapidly disappeared into the grey clouds, leaving behind only the echo of its power and the smell of kerosene in the humid air. Ana Lucia stood there, alone on the wet highway, the wind dying down, the rain returning to its original intensity. The silence that followed the helicopter's departure was almost more deafening than the noise that had preceded it. She looked at the spot where Mrs. Aurora's vehicle was, now surrounded by a highway patrol car and a tow truck arriving to provide assistance, as per her orders. The scene seemed peaceful, but the internal affairs officer knew that peace was an illusion. The storm hadn't passed. It had merely shifted, and Ana Lucia was now squarely in its eye. The arrest had been made, not just for a corrupt sergeant, but for an entire system, and she, Ana Lucia, had just been recruited to the front lines of a war that was barely beginning. The silence that followed the helicopter's departure was almost more deafening than the noise that had preceded it. An abrupt vacuum, filled only by the dripping rain and the distant echo of a power that had just manifested and vanished. Ana Lucia stood there, alone on the wet highway, the rotor wash diminishing, the rain returning to its original intensity, lashing her face and soaking her clothes. The smell of kerosene lingered in the humid air, a pungent reminder that what had just happened was no fever dream. Her eyes swept the landscape. The spot where Mrs. Aurora's vehicle was, now surrounded by a highway patrol car and a tow truck arriving to provide assistance. The scene seemed peaceful, almost bucolic, were it not for the whirlwind of emotions and thoughts churning in the internal affairs officer's mind. Peace was an illusion, she knew. The storm hadn't passed. It had merely shifted, and Ana Lucia was now squarely in its eye. Colonel Vance's words echoed in her mind, each laden with a weight she could barely bear. You, Officer Lucia, have just become a crucial piece in this storm. Be prepared, because what comes next will make today's incident seem like a summer breeze. A summer breeze. The irony was cruel. What could be worse than a war helicopter, a Pentagon colonel, and the discovery of a corruption network that extended far beyond a mere sergeant? She felt a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the rain. It wasn't just fear, but a strange mix of dread and latent adrenaline. Colonel Vance had not only dragged her into the center of her operation, but had also transformed her into a symbol, a potential target. Let him not forget her face. The phrase, spoken with that calculated coldness, was a veiled warning. Almeida, and by extension all who benefited from the rotten system, now knew who Ana Lucia was. She was the internal affairs officer who had dared to challenge them. The highway patrol sergeant, a young man with a confused expression, approached cautiously. "Officer Lucia, is everything all right?" "What? What was that?" His voice was a mixture of respect and disbelief. He had seen the helicopter, the tactical team, but had no idea of the magnitude of what had occurred. Ana Lucia took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. "Sergeant, the incident with Mrs. Vance's vehicle has been resolved. Sergeant Almeida has been detained for extortion and abuse of authority. He will be taken for interrogation. Please ensure her car is towed to the nearest precinct for forensics and that she herself is transported safely." She tried to sound professional, but the tremor in her hands was noticeable. Detained? But by whom? The sergeant seemed even more confused. Ana Lucia hesitated. How to explain that a war helicopter had taken the corrupt officer? "By a special team. It's a high-priority operation. Your superior will be informed shortly. For now, just follow my instructions and keep the area under control." She couldn't reveal more. Not yet. Discretion was crucial, and she felt that every move she made would be observed. As the sergeant walked away to give orders, Ana Lucia picked up her own phone, the common, mundane device that seemed so inadequate after seeing Vance's communicator. She needed to call her boss, the Inspector General. He needed to know, but how to frame the story without sounding like she had gone mad. "Chief, I have a situation rather unusual." The words seemed too weak to describe the hurricane that had just swept through her. She looked at the gray sky, where the guardian angel had disappeared. Colonel Vance was up there, probably already en route to some command center, orchestrating the next phase of Silent Storm. The cleansing, the removal of the parasites. Ana Lucia felt a mix of admiration and terror. The woman she had underestimated was an unstoppable force, and now Ana Lucia was bound to her, whether she liked it or not. The arrest had been made not just for a corrupt sergeant, but for an entire system. And she, Ana Lucia, had just been recruited to the front lines of a war that was barely beginning. Today's incident was merely the prologue. She felt the weight of responsibility, the imminent danger, but also a spark of determination. She was an internal affairs officer. Her life was to fight corruption. And now, she had the chance to do it on a scale she never imagined. The storm had arrived, and Ana Lucia was ready to face it, even if it meant becoming the lightning bolt itself. The storm had arrived, and Ana Lucia was ready to face it, even if it meant becoming the lightning bolt itself. With this new and terrifying determination, she brought the phone to her ear, the common, mundane device that seemed so inadequate after seeing Vance's communicator. The dial tone rang, shrill in the humid silence that surrounded her. She needed to call her boss, the Inspector General. He needed to know, but how to frame the story without sounding like she had gone mad. "Chief, I have a situation. Rather unusual." The words seemed too weak to describe the hurricane that had just swept through her. On the other end of the line, the Inspector General's voice, always so controlled, sounded with a tone of weariness. "Ana Lucia, at this hour, I hope it's not another case of embezzlement in some forgotten city hall." She swallowed hard, the rain running down her face. "No, Chief, it's bigger, much bigger. Sergeant Almeida of the Federal Highway Patrol. He's been detained." There was a pause. "Detained? Why? I thought you were just investigating a bribery complaint. Do we have enough evidence already?" "Yes, Chief, but I wasn't the one who detained him. It was a special team." Ana Lucia hesitated, searching for the right words. "An extraction team and a war helicopter." The silence on the other end of the line became heavy, almost palpable. "Ana Lucia, are you all right? Are you serious? A war helicopter? Where are you?" The Inspector General's voice now held a tone of concern, mixed with poorly disguised incredulity. "I'm on Federal Highway 101, Chief, at the same spot where Mrs. Aurora's car broke down. And yes, I'm serious. Sergeant Almeida demanded a bribe from her, Chief. And Mrs. Aurora wasn't just any lady. She was Colonel Aurora Vance from the Pentagon." The Inspector General let out an audible sigh, a sound that seemed to tear the air. "Colonel, from the Pentagon. Ana Lucia, this is a nightmare. Are you sure about what you're saying?" "Absolutely, Chief. She showed me her credentials, and the helicopter, the guardian angel, and as she called it, left no doubt. She took him. Sergeant Almeida was taken for interrogation by a tactical team, and she told me he shouldn't forget my face." But the last sentence seemed to echo in the Inspector General's mind. She said, "What? Ana Lucia, you're in danger. This is no longer an internal affairs case. This is military diplomacy. International implications." What else did she say? "She said it's the beginning of Operation Silent Storm. The cleansing, the removal of the parasites that corrode institutions from within. And that Sergeant Almeida was just the first. She recruited me, Chief, said I'm a crucial piece." The Inspector General was silent for a long moment, and Ana Lucia could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. The weight of the situation, the scale of what had just happened, was finally settling in. "Ana Lucia, listen to me carefully. Do nothing. Absolutely nothing without my direct orders. Return to the capital immediately. I will mobilize a security team for you. This is an atomic bomb. A Pentagon colonel acting on our soil, arresting a federal officer. This is going to explode." "But Chief, she gave me instructions for her car, for forensics." "Forget her car for now. The priority is your safety and damage control. I need to speak with the Attorney General, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is a potential diplomatic crisis, not to mention the internal war she just declared. You are in the eye of the hurricane, Ana Lucia. Do not move until the team arrives, and do not speak to anyone else about this under any circumstances. Understood? The Inspector General's voice was now urgent, almost desperate. Ana Lucia felt a chill, not just from the cold rain, but from the gravity of his words. She had underestimated the impact. It wasn't just the arrest of a corrupt individual. It was the beginning of something much larger, with ramifications she could barely conceive. Understood, Chief. Her voice was firm, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. I'll call you in 10 minutes with more instructions. Stay safe, Ana Lucia. This is not a game. The call ended, leaving Ana Lucia alone again, but now with a new layer of fear and responsibility. She looked at the tow truck driving away with Vance's car, followed by the highway patrol car. The scene now seemed completely surreal, a remnant of a reality that had just been turned upside down. The young sergeant, who had approached earlier, now watched her from a distance, not daring to come closer again. He felt the weight of the atmosphere, the change in the air, even without understanding the dimension of what had occurred. Ana Lucia felt the weight of responsibility, the imminent danger. But strangely, the spark of determination Vance had ignited in her did not extinguish. She was an internal affairs officer. Her life was to fight corruption, and now she had the chance to do it on a scale she never imagined. The storm had arrived, and she was at its center, not just as an observer, but as an active participant, a target, and perhaps as the very lightning bolt Colonel Vance had promised. What would come next, she didn't know. But she was ready to find out. The game had begun, and the rules, she realized, had just been rewritten by a woman who feared nothing. The Inspector General's voice still echoed in her ears, a mantra of urgency and warning. Do not move until the team arrives. Ana Lucia stood motionless, the cold rain washing her face, but unable to extinguish the fire Vance had lit in her soul. The fear was real, palpable, but the determination was an ember that refused to die. She was an internal affairs officer, and her life was dedicated to fighting corruption. The scale had changed, the risks were stratospheric, but the essence of her mission remained. She was in the eye of the hurricane, yes, but she also felt she was the only one capable of seeing the truth in the impending chaos. The young sergeant, still at a respectful distance, seemed like a ghost in the fog. His eyes, previously confused, now held a mixture of apprehension and veiled curiosity. He had witnessed something extraordinary, something that defied his entire understanding of protocol and hierarchy. Ana Lucia knew he was a witness, a weak link in the chain of discretion her boss had tried to impose. But what could she say? The orders were clear. Do not speak to anyone else about this. Time dragged on, each second an eternity under the grey sky. The sound of the tow truck and police car disappearing into the distance was a reminder that the first phase of Vance's silent storm was already in motion, regardless of her boss's orders. The colonel's car, now in custody for forensics, was a chess piece already moved, a fait accompli she had ensured even before the catastrophic call. A small victory, perhaps, or just another layer of complexity in a game she barely understood. Suddenly, the quiet of Federal Highway 101 was broken again, not by the sound of a helicopter, but by the deep rumble of an armored vehicle, painted matte black, that emerged from the fog. It wasn't a common police car. It was a tactical SUV with dark windows and a satellite dish on the roof that seemed to have come straight out of a spy movie. It stopped a few meters from her, and two robust figures, dressed in dark suits and discreet earpieces, stepped out. Their movements were precise, calculated, their eyes sweeping the area with frightening efficiency. Internal Affairs Officer Ana Lucia, one of them asked, his voice grave and emotionless, almost robotic. He didn't wait for an answer, just opened the vehicle's back door. "We have orders to take you to the capital immediately. Your safety is the priority." Ana Lucia nodded, feeling a shiver. Her boss's efficiency was impressive, almost frightening. The security team had arrived in record time, confirming the gravity of the situation. She cast one last look at the young sergeant, who now seemed even smaller and more isolated, watching the scene with wide eyes. He would be the first to spread the story, the seed of a rumor that would soon become an urban legend, and then an inconvenient truth. As she entered the vehicle, the interior was a sanctuary of technology and discretion. The smell of new leather mingled with a faint metallic aroma, perhaps of hidden weaponry. The driver was already in motion even before the door fully closed, accelerating back down Federal Highway 101 in the opposite direction from which Vance's helicopter had disappeared. Ana Lucia felt the weight of the armor around her, a physical protection that she knew was merely an illusion in the face of the political and military storm that was brewing. She picked up her phone, the mundane device that now seemed like a child's toy. No messages, no missed calls. The Inspector General was silent, which meant he was acting. She could almost visualize him in his capital office, brow furrowed, phone in one hand and the other massaging his temples, as he tried to defuse the bomb Vance had triggered. The Attorney General, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the military, all would be dragged into this maelstrom. As the rainy landscape passed by the armored window, Ana Lucia reflected on Vance's words. Let him not forget her face. It wasn't just a threat to Almeida, but a warning to all who benefited from corruption. And now, Ana Lucia, the internal affairs officer who dared to investigate a bribery complaint, was the face of that threat. She was a target, yes, but also a banner. Colonel Vance had not just recruited her, she had elevated her to a symbol. The game had begun, and Ana Lucia was on the board, not as a pawn, but as a crucial piece, as Vance had said. She felt the danger, the uncertainty, but also a strange sense of purpose. Silent Storm wasn't just a military operation, it was a crusade against the shadows that corroded the country. And Ana Lucia, the internal affairs officer, was ready to be the lightning bolt that would illuminate them. What would come next, she didn't know, but she was ready to find out. The rules had been rewritten, and she was ready to play. The deep rumble of the armored engine muffled the sound of the rain, transforming the interior of the tactical SUV into an isolation chamber. Ana Lucia felt the weight of the armor around her, a physical protection that she knew was merely an illusion in the face of the political and military storm that was brewing. The two agents in front, silent and efficient, seemed like extensions of the machine itself, their movements precise and devoid of emotion. She was a valuable cargo, a package to be delivered, and the speed with which they had arrived confirmed the urgency and gravity of the situation. The rainy landscape passed like a grey blur by the dark window, a distorted mirror of her own mind. The Inspector General, in his justified panic, had activated the bureaucratic and security machine with frightening efficiency. But his efficiency was a response to the chaos Colonel Vance had deliberately sown. "An atomic bomb," he had said, and Ana Lucia was sitting on the fuse, feeling the heat of the spark Vance had ignited. The Colonel's words echoed in her mind, a disturbing and inspiring mantra all at once. Operation Silent Storm, the cleansing, removal of the parasites, and more directly, you are a crucial piece. What kind of piece? A sacrificial pawn in a high-stakes chess game, or a queen with the power to change the course of the battle? The uncertainty was a heavy burden, but adrenaline still coursed through her veins, mixed with a strange sense of purpose. She was an internal affairs officer. Her life was to fight corruption, to unearth the filth that corroded institutions from within. But it had always been an ant struggle, a solitary battle against windmills where each small victory was followed by 10 new defeats. Now, Vance had offered a different scale, a nuclear weapon to fight a metastatic cancer. The method was brutal, the approach relentless, but the promise of a real cleansing was tempting, almost irresistible to someone who had dedicated her life to this cause. The fear was real, palpable. The Inspector General was not wrong. International implications, diplomatic crisis, internal war. She was in the eye of the hurricane, and the visibility Vance had given her was a double-edged sword. Let him not forget her face. It wasn't just a threat to Almeida, but a warning to all who benefited from corruption. And now, Ana Lucia, the internal affairs officer who dared to investigate a bribery complaint, was the face of that threat. She was a target, yes, but also a banner. Colonel Vance had not just recruited her, she had elevated her to a symbol. As the SUV cut through the road, Ana Lucia imagined the Inspector General in his capital office. He would be in a whirlwind of phone calls, his brow furrowed, the phone in one hand and the other massaging his temples as he tried to defuse the bomb Vance had triggered. The Attorney General, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the military. All would be dragged into this maelstrom. Vance's audacity, a Pentagon colonel acting on our soil, arresting a federal officer with a war helicopter, was unprecedented. It was a veiled act of war, a declaration of intent that defied all diplomatic conventions. And the young sergeant? He would be the first to spread the story, the seed of a rumor that would soon become an urban legend, and then an inconvenient truth. Federal Highway 101, once a stage for Almeida's petty corruption, was now the epicenter of an earthquake that would spread throughout the country. The story would spread like wildfire, distorted, exaggerated, but with an undeniable core of truth. Fear would settle in the hearts of the corrupt, the seed of silent storm, germinating in the shadows. The phone in her hand remained silent, a mundane object that now seemed like a child's toy. No messages, no missed calls. The Inspector General was silent, which meant he was acting, and his silence was more deafening than any scream. The city began to emerge on the horizon, a patch of lights through the curtain of rain. The capital, her destination. But it wasn't a return to normal. It was an entry into a new battlefield. She wasn't just being taken to safety, she was being taken to the command center of a crisis, where she would be interrogated, protected, and perhaps used. Colonel Vance had rewritten the rules of the game, and Ana Lucia, the internal affairs officer, was ready to play. She felt the danger, the uncertainty, but also a strange sense of purpose. Silent Storm wasn't just a military operation. It was a crusade against the shadows that corroded the country, and Ana Lucia, the internal affairs officer, was ready to be the lightning bolt that would illuminate them. What would come next? She didn't know, but she was ready to find out. The game had begun, and she was on the board, not as a pawn, but as a crucial piece, as Vance had said. And somehow, she knew that her face, like Vance's, would be unforgettable to those the colonel had promised to hunt. The capital awaited, and with it, the next chapter of this storm. The tactical SUV glided through the wet streets of the capital, the rain now finer but persistent. The city lights, once a distant promise, now became a labyrinth of reflections on the asphalt. The speed did not decrease, the agents in front maintaining the same unwavering posture. The vehicle did not head to a police station or a common government building. Instead, it turned onto a discreet street, flanked by high walls and security cameras, and stopped before a massive iron gate that opened silently. The interior of the complex was equally austere, a paved courtyard, surrounded by brutalist architecture buildings, with few windows and a sense of impenetrable security. There were no signs, no identification marks. It was a place where secrets were kept, where crises were managed away from public eyes. A perfect place for Silent Storm to begin to unfold. As soon as the SUV stopped, the rear door was opened by one of the agents. The cold, humid night air invaded the interior, but Ana Lucia didn't feel the shock. Her mind was focused, her senses sharp. She exited the vehicle, feeling the weight of each step. The Inspector General awaited her at the entrance of one of the buildings, his figure tall and imposing, but now bent by visible tension. Beside him, two other men in suits with serious expressions and penetrating gazes. One of them she vaguely recognized from news reports, the Attorney General. The other, a high-ranking general with insignia she couldn't identify in the dim light. The Inspector General wasted no time with formalities. His voice, usually calm and controlled, was hoarse with exhaustion and worry. "Ana Lucia, thank God you're safe. What the hell happened out there? What did Colonel Vance do?" It wasn't a question, it was a demand, laden with frustration and poorly disguised fear. Ana Lucia looked at the tense faces before her. She was the link, the witness, the central piece of a puzzle no one there fully understood. Silent Storm had reached the capital, and she was the first lightning bolt. She took a deep breath, smelling the metallic scent of security and feeling the weight of expectations. The rules had been rewritten, and she was ready to play. The truth, she knew, would be as shocking as the operation itself. And from that moment on, her life, and perhaps the fate of a nation, would never be the same. She was the internal affairs officer, and now she was the voice of the storm. The cold night air, laden with the smell of rain and wet asphalt, felt like a chilling breath of reality. Ana Lucia felt the weight of their gazes upon her, each one a sharp knife piercing her newfound armor. The Inspector General, with his previously unshakable posture, now seemed like a monument corroded by anxiety. Beside him, the Attorney General displayed an expression of disbelief mixed with contained fury. His eyes narrowed, evaluating her like a piece of evidence. The General, in turn, was a sphinx in uniform, his brow furrowed, but without any apparent emotion in his eyes, only a cold, calculating analysis. They expected answers. She was the only one who had them. The Inspector General's question, "What the hell happened out there? What did Colonel Vance do?" echoed in the heavy silence of the courtyard. It wasn't a question of curiosity, but of desperation. Ana Lucia took a deep breath, the smell of the storm's ozone still in her nostrils. She was no longer the internal affairs officer who investigated minor deviations. She was the messenger of a storm, the voice of a revolution. Vance's words, "You are a crucial piece," resonated, giving her a strange strength. She could not fail. She could not falter. "Colonel Vance," she acted, Ana Lucia began, her voice surprisingly firm, despite her internal tremor. She offered no apologies, nor did she try to soften the truth. She arrested the Federal Highway Patrol officer Almeida for attempted extortion, and she did it with a war helicopter. Dun, the Inspector General let out a guttural sound, a mixture of shock and exasperation. The Attorney General took a step forward, his fists clenched. "A war helicopter!" he almost shouted, his voice hoarse with indignation. "On our soil? This is an act of war, a violation of our sovereignty. Who is this woman? Where did she come from?" The general, until then silent, finally spoke. His voice grave and authoritative. "Colonel Vance, from the Pentagon," he said, without taking his eyes off Ana Lucia. "We have preliminary reports. An unauthorized operation, a diplomatic chaos in the making. But what did she tell you, Internal Affairs Officer? What was her motivation for such audacity?" Ana Lucia felt the weight of that gaze. The general wasn't just curious. He was seeking the truth behind the smokescreen, the strategic intent. She knew she needed to be precise, that every word would be dissected. She wasn't just arresting a corrupt officer, General, she replied, looking him directly in the eyes. She was sending a message, a declaration of war against the corruption that, according to her, is corroding the country from within. The Attorney General scoffed. A declaration of war from a foreign colonel on our territory? This is insane. We cannot allow a foreign agent to dictate the rules here. She's not dictating the rules, Attorney General, Ana Lucia corrected, feeling a shiver. She's rewriting them. She called it Operation Silent Storm, a cleansing, the removal of the parasites. She used Vance's exact words, letting their weight fall upon the men before her. She told me I was a crucial piece, that my face and hers would be unforgettable to those she promised to hunt. The Inspector General ran his hands through his disheveled hair. She's using you, Ana Lucia. She's using internal affairs to legitimize her outrageous actions. And/or she's giving us the tools to do what we've always tried to do but never achieved on a large scale, Ana Lucia retorted, adrenaline pulsing. She doesn't care about bureaucracy, about diplomatic conventions. She cares about results. She wants to eradicate corruption once and for all, and she has the means to do it. The general took another step, his eyes fixed on her. What means? Internal Affairs Officer. What else does she plan? Does she have a team, a support network? Is this a coup d'etat disguised as an anti-corruption operation? The general's question cut through the air like lightning. Ana Lucia felt a chill. Vance hadn't detailed her means, only her intent and her capacity for execution. She didn't give me operational details, General, just the vision. She said the sergeant who witnessed Almeida's arrest would spread the story. That fear would spread, that silent storm would germinate in the shadows. The Attorney General shook his head, incredulous. This is madness. A foreign military officer acting as a vigilante in our country, causing an international incident of catastrophic proportions. And you seem to be defending her. I'm not defending her, Attorney General, Ana Lucia replied, her voice now lower but laden with conviction. I'm reporting what I saw and heard. And I'm saying that, however shocking the method, the promise of a real cleansing is something many of us, who fight corruption daily, never dared to dream of. She didn't just arrest a corrupt individual. She exposed the fragility of the system, the audacity of impunity. She showed that there is a force capable of acting where the state fails. The Inspector General approached, his voice almost a whisper. Ana Lucia, do you understand the implications of this? The country could enter an unprecedented crisis. Relations with the United States, our own internal security. Everything is at stake. This woman is an atomic bomb, and you are the only one who has been near the detonator. Ana Lucia looked at the three men, each representing a pillar of power that now seemed to tremble. She was the witness, the bridge between chaos and order, between the old way of fighting and the new, brutal reality Vance had imposed. She felt the danger, yes, but also a strange sense that, finally, the fight she had waged alone for so long was about to become a full-scale war. I understand, she said, her voice echoing in the courtyard, and I'm ready to play. The game, as Vance said, has already begun. The silence that followed was even heavier, laden with a new understanding. They weren't just dealing with a diplomatic incident, they were dealing with an unstoppable force. And Ana Lucia, the Internal Affairs Officer, was now part of it. The capital awaited, and with it the next chapter of this storm, which, for them, was only just beginning to manifest. The silence that followed Ana Lucia's declaration was not merely the absence of sound. It was a heavy vacuum, filled with the gravity of her words and the uncertain future they announced. The three men before her, pillars of power and order, seemed to have been struck by lightning. The Inspector General, previously bowed by worry, now appeared petrified, his eyes wide in a mixture of despair and incomprehension. The Attorney General, his face red with fury, clenched his fists, his jaw locked, as if struggling to suppress a shout. And the general, the Sphinx in uniform, finally broke his impassivity, a muscle twitching in his cheek, his previously calculating eyes now flashing with dangerous intensity. "Play?" The Inspector General managed to whisper, his voice almost inaudible, a tenuous thread of disbelief. "Ana Lucia, you don't understand. This is not a game. It's an affront to our sovereignty, a veiled declaration of war. You are placing yourself in the center of a hurricane that could destroy everything we've built." The Attorney General took an abrupt step forward, his voice exploding in indignation. "She's delusional, or she's been co-opted. General, this woman needs to be removed immediately. She's a threat to national security, an accomplice to a foreign terrorist." Ana Lucia did not back down. Her eyes, previously tear-filled with weariness, now shone with cold determination. She had crossed the Rubicon, and there was no turning back. Terrorist? She arrested a corrupt official, Attorney General, an officer who extorted citizens. She did what our system, with all its bureaucracy and sovereignty, hasn't been able to do for decades. She acted. The general intervened, his voice grave and cutting, silencing the Attorney General with a look. "Internal Affairs Officer, I understand your frustration, but Colonel Vance's methods are unacceptable. A war helicopter on national soil without authorization to arrest a traffic officer. This is an unprecedented escalation. What does she really want? What did she really tell you about this cleansing?" Ana Lucia took a deep breath, feeling the cold night air in her lungs, as if preparing for battle. "She wants to eradicate the parasites. She said corruption is a cancer killing the country, and that palliative measures no longer work. She wants radical surgery, and she has the means to do it." "What means?" the general insisted, his voice laden with urgency. "Does she have a task force? An intelligence network? Is this a coup d'etat disguised as an anti-corruption crusade? Is the Pentagon aware of this, or is she a rogue agent?" "She didn't give me operational details," Ana Lucia replied, the truth in her words, but omitting the strategic details Vance had deliberately withheld. She spoke of silent storm germinating in the shadows. She said the sergeant who witnessed Almeida's arrest would spread the story, and that fear would spread faster than official news. She wants panic to grip the corrupt general. She wants them to feel what their victims feel: powerlessness and terror. At that moment, one of the agents who had brought Ana Lucia approached, a tablet in hand, his face pale. "Gentlemen, we just received an alert. The highway incident. It leaked. Videos are circulating on social media, images of the helicopter, of the officer being taken away. The sergeant's story is already going viral. And the American embassy just issued a note of deep concern and urgent internal investigation regarding the unauthorized conduct of one of its officers." The Inspector General put his hands to his head, a groan escaping his lips. "It's a disaster, a complete disaster. The press will devour us. The world will question us." The Attorney General, in turn, seemed to have found new breath for his fury. "This is unacceptable. We need to issue an international arrest warrant for this Colonel Vance. She is a war criminal on our territory." The general, however, didn't seem so hasty. His eyes were fixed on the tablet, absorbing the information. An arrest warrant for a Pentagon colonel, Attorney General. That would be a diplomatic declaration of war. And what if she has support within her own structure? What if this Operation Silent Storm is more than just a rogue agent? What if it's an intervention? The word hung in the air, heavy and menacing. Ana Lucia felt a chill. The general was beginning to see the bigger picture, the one Vance had painted. She said she doesn't care about bureaucracy, General. She cares about results. She wants to cleanse the country, and she won't stop. And you, Internal Affairs Officer, do you really believe she can do this, that this cleansing is possible? Or are you just a piece in a much larger game, one we've barely begun to understand? I believe the system is broken, General, Ana Lucia replied, her voice firm, though her heart pounded in her chest. I've seen corruption in all its forms, at all levels, and I've seen the impotence of our laws, of our processes. Perhaps a storm is needed to clear the air. The Inspector General, who had somewhat recovered from the initial shock, looked at Ana Lucia with an expression of betrayal. You are defending an invader, Ana Lucia, a woman who disrespected all our laws, all our institutions. I am defending justice, Inspector General, she retorted without averting her gaze. The justice we promised, but rarely delivered. Vance may be brutal, but she is effective. And if the only way to eradicate the cancer is with radical surgery, perhaps that's what we need. The general cleared his throat, breaking the tension between the two. We need a plan. Now. We cannot afford to discuss ideologies while the country disintegrates. Internal Affairs Officer, come with us. We need every detail, every word Vance said, and we need to decide. Are we going to try to contain her, or are we going to try to understand what she truly intends and how it might affect us? The world is watching, and Silent Storm has just gained its first wins in the capital. He gestured towards the building entrance, an invitation that sounded more like an intimation. Ana Lucia knew that from that moment on, her life would no longer be her own. She was the witness, the messenger, and now perhaps the compass amidst the chaos. The complex, once a refuge of secrets, now seemed like the eye of a hurricane, and she was right at its center. The capital awaited, and with it, the next chapter of this storm, which for them was only just beginning to manifest. And Ana Lucia, the Internal Affairs Officer, felt that the real battle was only just beginning. The general's invitation, more a veiled intimation, resonated in the heavy courtyard air. Ana Lucia felt the weight of each step as she followed the three men into the complex. The night's cold seemed to have seeped into her bones, but it was the chill of responsibility, of the irrevocable choice that propelled her. She had crossed the line, and she knew there was no turning back. The fate of the country, and perhaps her own, was now intrinsically linked to that silent storm. They entered a labyrinth of corridors, the silence broken only by the echo of their own footsteps. With each armored door that opened and closed, Ana Lucia felt more isolated, more embedded in a world of secrets and decisions that could shape the future. Finally, they arrived at an austere conference room, with a polished mahogany oval table dominating the center. High-definition screens covered one wall, displaying tactical maps and complex flowcharts. The lighting was cold and merciless, revealing every line of concern on the men's faces. The general indicated a chair for Ana Lucia, seating himself at the opposite end of the table. The Attorney General and the Inspector General took their places, their gazes fixed on the Internal Affairs Officer, a mixture of distrust and despair. An aide, who was already waiting for them, began projecting images and news onto the screens, showing the rapid dissemination of the Almeida incident. Amateur videos of the helicopter, memes with the terrified sergeant, and the American Embassy's note, now highlighted, with the headline "Pentagon Investigates Serious Incident Involving Officer." Internal Affairs Officer, the general began, his voice grave and controlled, but with a palpable urgency. We need everything, every detail, every nuance of your conversation with Colonel Vance. What did she say about her objectives, her methods, her support structure? We cannot fight what we do not understand. Ana Lucia took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. She didn't give me explicit operational details, General. She spoke of a cleansing, of eradicating the parasites. She said corruption is a cancer and that the system's bureaucracy is complicit in the disease. She wants radical surgery. Radical surgery. The Attorney General interjected, slamming his hand on the table. That's a euphemism for terrorism. She's acting like a militia, General. We need a firm, immediate response. An international arrest warrant is the least of it. And what would that do, Attorney General? Ana Lucia retorted, undaunted. Turn an American colonel into a martyr. Provoke an even greater diplomatic crisis. She acted where the state failed. And the people, Attorney General, the people are tired of seeing impunity. The videos circulating don't just show a helicopter, they show a corrupt official being taken away. And for many, that is justice. The Inspector General shuddered. But at what cost, Ana Lucia? At what cost? Our sovereignty, our international image. We are being humiliated. The humiliation already existed, Inspector General, Ana Lucia replied, her voice firm. The humiliation of seeing public money diverted, of seeing justice sold, of seeing the common citizen voiceless. Vance merely made that humiliation visible to the world, and she wants fear to spread, not fear of the state, but fear of consequence. She wants the corrupt to feel what Almeida felt. The general watched the screens, where social media comments were beginning to divide. Many condemned the invasion, but a growing number of voices expressed veiled or even explicit support for Vance's action, tired of the institution's ineffectiveness. She spoke of silent storm germinating in the shadows, Ana Lucia continued, remembering Vance's exact words. She said the sergeant would spread the story, and that fear would spread faster than official news. She's not interested in open confrontations, General. She's interested in destabilizing the corruption network from within. She wants the parasites to start distrusting each other, to turn themselves in, to flee. This is psychological warfare, the General murmured, his eyes narrowed. An information war, and she's already winning the first battle, it seems. He pointed to the screens, where a new graph showed a spike in searches for Colonel Vance and Silent Storm. She's not a rogue agent internal affairs officer. She's a strategist, and if the Pentagon is investigating, it might just be a smokescreen. What if this operation has support at higher levels than we imagine? The word intervention hung in the air again, even heavier than before. She didn't give me the impression of acting alone, General, Ana Lucia admitted. She has resources and an unshakable conviction. She believes she is doing what is right, what is necessary, and she won't stop. The Attorney General stood up abruptly. So what do we do? Are we going to sit and watch while a foreigner dismantles our country under the pretext of justice? This is a dangerous precedent. Tomorrow anyone might feel entitled to act this way. Or perhaps, Ana Lucia said, looking at the Attorney General, perhaps it's a catalyst. Perhaps it's the shock we need to finally act with the same determination. She exposed the fragility of our system. Now the choice is ours. Will we bow to external and internal pressure, or will we use this storm to cleanse what needs cleansing? The General slammed his hand on the table, a dry sound that silenced everyone. Enough. We don't have time for ideological debates. Internal Affairs Officer, you are the only one who has been face to face with her. You are our bridge. We need a plan that allows us to regain control of the narrative, protect our sovereignty, and at the same time deal with the root of the problem Vance is exposing. What would she do now? Where would she strike next? Ana Lucia closed her eyes for an instant, visualizing Vance's cold, determined gaze. She wouldn't attack. She would make fear work for her. She would make the corrupt themselves surrender or expose themselves. She would make Silent Storm not about arresting them one by one, but about dismantling the structure, the system of impunity. She would make each of them feel that the helicopter could be coming for them at any moment. The silence that followed was the deepest of all. The image of a war helicopter. Hovering over the head of every corrupt official was a weapon more potent than any bomb. Silent Storm wasn't about brute force, but about the terror of uncertainty, the panic of exposure. And Ana Lucia, the internal affairs officer, felt that the true battle, the battle for the country's mind and morals, was only just beginning. The capital awaited, and with it, the next chapter of this storm, which for them was only just beginning to manifest. The silence that followed Ana Lucia's last sentence was heavier than the night air, denser than the very darkness that seemed to envelop the complex. The image of the war helicopter hovering not just over a corrupt sergeant, but over the head of each of them, was a weapon of psychological terror that surpassed any explosive. Silent Storm wasn't about brute force, but about the panic of uncertainty, the terror of exposure. And Ana Lucia, the internal affairs officer, felt that the true battle, the battle for the country's mind and morals, was only just beginning. The general was the first to break the spell, his eyes, previously fixed on the screens, now turning to Ana Lucia with a new intensity. There was respect, yes, but also a hint of desperation. He had underestimated Vance, and the internal affairs officer had been the only one to glimpse the depth of the colonel's strategy. "So, she's not interested in arresting all of them," the general murmured, more to himself than to the others. "She wants them to self-destruct. She wants fear to consume them, paranoia to devour them. She wants each of them to become a potential informant, a target for their own accomplices." The Attorney General, who had previously vociferated for action, now seemed to have shrunk in his chair, his face pale. The idea of a psychological war, invisible and omnipresent, was far more terrifying than a direct attack. How to fight an enemy that doesn't show itself, but instills fear with every shadow, every whisper. "This is diabolical," the Inspector General whispered. His voice choked. "She's playing with the worst human tendencies. Greed, distrust, cowardice. She's using our own corruption against ourselves." Ana Lucia nodded, her voice calm, but laden with a gravity that silenced any objection. "She doesn't seek justice through the laws they disrespected, Inspector General. She seeks justice through the chaos they created. She wants the rot to surface on its own, for the system to implode." The general leaned over the table, his elbows resting, his hands clasped in a gesture of deep reflection. "We need countermeasures, immediate ones. If Silent Storm is a war of information and fear, we need to control the narrative. We need to restore confidence, or at least the illusion of it." "How, General?" the Attorney General asked, his voice almost a lament. "How do you fight fear? How do you convince a people who saw a corrupt sergeant taken away by a war helicopter that the state still has control? The videos are everywhere. People are laughing, General. Laughing at our impotence and applauding hers. The screens on the wall flickered, showing new graphs. Searches for Colonel Vance and Silent Storm had skyrocketed. But, more disturbingly, there was an exponential increase in anonymous tips on government channels, many with surprising details, some clearly false, but others with a level of precision that sent chills down one's spine. "She's succeeding," Ana Lucia affirmed, pointing to the data. "Fear is doing her work. The corrupt are beginning to expose themselves, to distrust each other. Some perhaps trying to get ahead, to clean their own houses before the helicopter arrives. Others using paranoia to attack rivals. We need a statement," the general decided, his voice firmer now, the military mind taking control. "A joint declaration. The Attorney General, the Inspector General, myself, condemning the invasion, but promising a rigorous investigation and an internal cleansing. We need to show that the state is acting, that we are not inert." "What if she attacks again while we're talking?" the Inspector General questioned. a panic returning to his eyes. What if the next target is someone even more prominent, someone who completely destabilizes the government? Ana Lucia shook her head. She wouldn't attack. Not directly, not now. She wants fear to spread, uncertainty to corrode. She wants each of them to feel they are next without her having to lift a finger. The next attack will come from within, General. It will come from the implosion of the system she is provoking. The general pondered her words. Then the statement must be accompanied by concrete actions. An anti-corruption task force with expanded powers. And you, Internal Affairs Officer, will lead it. You are the only one who understands her mind, the only one who can anticipate her moves. Ana Lucia felt a chill. The bridge she had become was now a burden, an overwhelming responsibility. She would be the face of the state's response, but also the personification of the failure Vance was exploiting. What if she has support from within? The Attorney General asked, paranoia beginning to set in. What if this silent storm has roots in our own institutions? Who can we trust? The question hung in the air. Laden with poison, Vance's strategy was working. Distrust, fear began to corrode the very foundations of power. That's exactly what she wants, Ana Lucia replied, her voice almost a whisper. She wants you to ask that question. She wants each of you to look sideways and question who is next to fall or who is helping to bring others down. She wants the network of complicity to unravel under the weight of its own distrust. The general slammed his hand on the table again, a dry, final sound. Enough speculation. We need to act. Internal Affairs Officer, you will have full support, unlimited resources, but we need results. We need to show that the state can clean its own house without the intervention of a rogue American colonel. We need to prove that we are not accomplices, but victims of a system that failed. He stood up, his imposing figure casting a shadow over the table. The world is watching, and Silent Storm has just gained its first wins in the capital. But we will show that we are capable of resisting, that this country will not be dismantled by fear, nor by a veiled intervention. Ana Lucia knew the task was monumental, perhaps impossible. How to fight a storm that fed on the very air they breathed. How to restore trust when distrust was the most potent weapon. She looked at the faces of the men before her, desperation and determination battling for space. The capital awaited, and with it the next chapter of this storm, which for them was only just beginning to manifest. And Ana Lucia, the Internal Affairs Officer, felt that the true battle, the battle for the country's soul, was only just beginning. The air in the general's office, previously heavy with uncertainty, now vibrated with a feverish, almost desperate energy. The decision was made. The statement would be the first line of defense, an attempt to build a dike against the tide of panic and distrust Vance had unleashed. But Ana Lucia knew that words, however firm, were fragile against silent terror. Night advanced as the cameras were turned on. The General, the Attorney General, and the Inspector General, all with grave expressions, appeared on screen. The General's voice, laden with authority, condemned the flagrant invasion of national sovereignty, promised a rigorous investigation and an unprecedented internal cleansing. The Attorney General echoed the promise of transparency, and the Inspector General, with a voice that barely disguised its tremor, guaranteed that justice would be served within legal and democratic precepts. But the capital was not listening with the same faith as before. The videos of the corrupt sergeant taken away by a war helicopter had become a meme, a symbol of the state's impotence and the audacity of a woman who asked no permission. As the official spoke, social media buzzed, sarcastic comments, laughing emojis, and more disturbingly, a wave of support for Colonel Vance and Silent Storm. The official narrative seemed a distant echo, drowned out by the roar of an imaginary helicopter hovering over every screen. Ana Lucia, observing everything from an adjacent room, felt a knot in her stomach. They were trying to put out a fire with gasoline. The promise of internal cleansing was exactly what Vance wanted. It was the validation of her thesis. The system was rotten, and only external pressure could force it to react. The next day, the Inspector General plunged into the task imposed upon her. The Anti-Corruption Task Force, hastily named Operation Rescue, was an impressive facade structure with unlimited resources but a fragile foundation. The faces around her were a mixture of youthful idealism, ardent skepticism, and in some cases palpable fear. She knew that distrust wasn't just out there, it had infiltrated the very walls of the institution. Who, among those who now called her leader, could be a link in the network of complicity Vance was dismantling? The first week of Operation Rescue was a whirlwind. Anonymous tips, already numerous, exploded in volume. Fear, as Vance had predicted, was doing its work. Mid- and high-ranking officials, previously untouchable, began to feel exposed. Some, in poorly disguised panic, tried to get ahead, cleaning their own files, firing subordinates who might have compromising information, or even in acts of desperation, turning in rivals in the hope of diverting focus. A director of a regulatory agency, known for his luxurious lifestyle, incompatible with his salary, requested medical leave for nervous exhaustion and disappeared. An undersecretary of public works, who had been the target of rumors for years, suddenly confessed to minor irregularities, hoping that an early confession would save him from a greater fall. These movements, previously unthinkable, were the first tremors of the implosion Vance had orchestrated. Ana Lucia saw the data, the reports, the forced confessions, and felt Vance's shadow in each of them. The colonel didn't need to lift a finger. Paranoia was her most effective weapon. Silent Storm wasn't about arresting them one by one, but about making each of them feel the weight of uncertainty, the imminence of a fall that could come at any moment from any direction. The Attorney General's question, "Who can we trust?" now echoed in every corridor, in every meeting. Colleagues looked at each other with suspicion. Long-standing alliances began to crack under the pressure. The fear of being the next to be exposed, or of being betrayed by an accomplice, was a poison that corroded the very core of power. Ana Lucia, in her rare hours of solitude, reflected on the irony of the situation. She, the Internal Affairs officer, was now at the epicenter of a storm she herself had helped predict. She was trying to use the tools of the state to fight an enemy who used the state's failures as her own weapons, and deep down, a part of her couldn't help but admire Colonel Vance's coldness and effectiveness. The American was achieving what years of investigations and legal processes hadn't even scratched. The war helicopter, which was once a distant image, now hovered over the capital, not as a physical aircraft, but as an omnipresent symbol of judgment and exposure. It was no longer a question of if the storm would hit, but of when and how devastating it would be. And Ana Lucia, the Internal Affairs officer, felt that the true battle, the battle for the country's soul, was only just beginning, and she was in the eye of the hurricane, desperately trying to guide a drifting ship through turbulent waters. The capital, once a cauldron of intrigue and veiled power, transformed into a swamp of distrust. Every shadow, every whisper carried the weight of a possible denunciation, of imminent betrayal. Operation Rescue, the supposed state response, was, in fact, a distorted mirror of Vance's strategy. Ana Lucia, the Internal Affairs officer, found herself leading a task force that, instead of hunting the corrupt, was being used by the corrupt themselves to hunt each other. The Internal Affairs phone lines, once a channel for sporadic complaints, now buzzed incessantly. It wasn't just ordinary citizens, but public officials of all ranks, calling to denounce colleagues, superiors, even subordinates, some with trembling voices, offered detailed information about bribery schemes, embezzlement, money laundering. Others, with a poorly disguised tone of revenge, used the opportunity to bring down long-standing rivals, planting false leads or exaggerating minor crimes. Paranoia was the new currency, and Vance, the colonel who had started it all, didn't need to lift a finger. Ana Lucia felt the weight of every call, every report. The Operation Rescue team, exhausted, desperately tried to separate the wheat from the chaff, but the avalanche of information was overwhelming. A lower court judge, known for his rigidity, was found dead in his apartment, the official cause being a heart attack. But rumors in the capital were different. He had been silenced for fearing his secrets would be revealed next, or perhaps for knowing too much about others' secrets. The fear was not just of being exposed, but of being swept away by the wave of cleansing, real or fabricated. The general, in his daily meetings with Ana Lucia, grew increasingly impatient. "Internal Affairs Officer, we need a big fish. A name that shows the public we're not fooling around, that the state is in control." But Ana Lucia knew that the big fish he wanted was just a scapegoat, a way to appease popular fury, while Vance, the true architect, watched from afar, smiling at the chaos she had sown. The media, previously skeptical, now reveled in the spectacle. News programs dedicated hours to the scandals of the week, and newspapers flaunted headlines about the cracks in the palace. The image of the war helicopter, which once hovered as a distant symbol, was now a symbol of hope for many and terror for others. Social media, in turn, had transformed Silent Storm into a movement, with hashtags and memes that ridiculed government ineffectiveness and celebrated each new downfall. The official narrative seemed increasingly distant from the reality perceived by the masses. The pressure on Ana Lucia was immense. She was the face of the response, but also the personification of failure. Her own subordinates looked at her with a mixture of respect and apprehension. Who could trust whom when the very foundation of trust had been corroded? She found herself questioning even her closest colleagues. Were they loyal to the state, or merely trying to survive the storm, ready to switch sides if the tide turned? One night, while working late in her office, Ana Lucia received an anonymous call. The voice, distorted and electronic, whispered, "Internal Affairs Officer, you are fighting a war you have already lost. Colonel Vance doesn't want to arrest the corrupt. She wants to destroy the system to rebuild it her way. And you, Ana Lucia, are just a piece on her chessboard." The call was abruptly cut, leaving a heavy, cold silence in the air. The message hit her like lightning. That was exactly it. Vance was no ordinary vigilante. She was a strategist. The internal cleansing the government had promised was, in fact, the controlled implosion Vance had orchestrated. She was using the very structure of the state to dismantle it, piece by piece, under the pretext of an anti-corruption crusade. And Ana Lucia, with her Operation Rescue, was inadvertently facilitating this process. The Inspector General felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't just fighting corruption, she was being manipulated in a much larger game. The idea that Vance might have roots within the institutions themselves, as the Attorney General had feared, now seemed terribly plausible. Who was behind that anonymous call? Was it a Vance agent trying to destabilize her, or an infiltrator within the government itself, warning her? In the following days, Ana Lucia began to see patterns. The most impactful denunciations, those that truly shook the structures, didn't seem to come from random panic. There was a precision, a subtle coordination. It was as if someone was guiding the storm, not just observing it. She began to suspect that Vance had informants, perhaps even within her own task force, who were fueling the paranoia and directing the attacks. Operation Rescue, which was supposed to be the state's salvation, was becoming an instrument of its own destruction. Ana Lucia was trapped in a moral and strategic dilemma: how to fight an enemy who used your own weapons against you, how to restore trust when distrust was the most potent weapon. The general, oblivious to the depth of the manipulation, continued to demand results. "We need a victory, a big arrest. The people are losing faith." But faith was already lost, and what remained was a visceral fear that corroded the very core of power. Ana Lucia knew she needed to change strategy, but how? How to fight against a shadow that manifested through the actions of her own colleagues. The capital was on the verge of collapse, not from a direct attack, but from a carefully orchestrated implosion. And in the eye of this hurricane, Ana Lucia, the internal affairs officer, felt that the true battle, the battle for the country's soul, was only just beginning. And she was alone, desperately trying to guide a drifting ship through turbulent waters, not knowing if the next wave would come from outside or from within her own crew. Silent Storm was not just an event, it was a process, a painful and inevitable transformation. And Ana Lucia now felt less like a leader and more like a witness, observing the crumbling of an empire brick by brick under the weight of its own rot. The distorted voice from the anonymous call still echoed in Ana Lucia's silent office. "Internal Affairs Officer, you are fighting a war you have already lost. Colonel Vance doesn't want to arrest the corrupt. She wants to destroy the system to rebuild it her way, and you, Ana Lucia, are just a piece on her chessboard." The words fixed in her mind, unfolding into a new and terrible clarity. It wasn't a fight against corruption, it was an orchestrated implosion, a surgical strike disguised as a cleansing. Vance was not a vigilante. She was an architect of a new world, and the old had to be demolished for the new to emerge. In the days that followed, Operation Rescue, once a beacon of hope, became a ship sinking in a sea of mud. The internal affairs phone lines, which had already hummed, now roared with the cacophony of denunciations, confessions, and false accusations. Ana Lucia's team, exhausted, desperately tried to separate the wheat from the chaff, but the avalanche was overwhelming. Every report, every testimony seemed to have a hidden layer, a secondary intention that Vance somehow had anticipated and exploited. The paranoia was so dense it could almost be touched, a toxic fog that suffocated truth and distorted reality. The general, in his daily meetings, was on the verge of collapse. His eyes, once firm, now carried deep, dark circles and a palpable anxiety. "Internal Affairs Officer, we need a big fish, a name that silences the media, that shows we still have control." He slammed the table, his voice hoarse with desperation. But Ana Lucia knew there was no big fish sufficient to contain the tide Vance had unleashed. The storm wasn't about arresting one or two, it was about dismantling the entire structure. The media, previously a mere observer, was now an active participant in the chaos. News programs transformed into public tribunals, and newspapers into obituaries of the old guard. The image of the war helicopter, which once hovered as a distant symbol, was now omnipresent, emblazoned on memes, graffiti, and even T-shirts. For the people, it was the promise of a new era. For the powerful, the harbinger of an inevitable end. Ana Lucia began to see the patterns the anonymous call had revealed. The most precise denunciations, those that hit the system's nerve centers, were not random. There was an orchestration, an invisible hand guiding the blows. Vance wasn't just observing. She was actively shaping the chaos, using Operation Rescue itself as a catalyst for the destruction she desired. The Inspector General felt a chill. She wasn't just a piece on the chessboard, she was a tool, inadvertently facilitating her adversary's plan. The night everything culminated was rainy, like the night Vance and the highway patrol officer first met. But this time, the rain wasn't just water, it was a deluge washing the capital's streets. Ana Lucia was in her office, her eyes fixed on the accumulating reports when the phone rang. It was a secure line, and the voice on the other end was unmistakable, clear, calm, with an authority that transcended any rank. It was Vance. "Internal Affairs Officer Ana Lucia," the voice said without preamble. "I hope you have understood the nature of my operation. The old order could not be reformed. It needed to be eradicated." Ana Lucia felt a knot in her throat. "And what is your ultimate goal, Colonel? Destroy everything for what?" There was a pause, and then Vance continued, her voice now tinged with unshakable conviction. "To build something that cannot be corrupted. To return to this country the integrity that was stolen from it. Silent Storm is not a punishment, it is a purification." Suddenly, the sound of helicopters filled the air, not one, but several. They roared, drowning out the sound of the rain. Ana Lucia ran to the window. Outside in the night sky, a formation of military helicopters, searchlights sweeping the darkness, hovered over the government buildings. It was not a symbol, it was reality. "What is this, Colonel Vance?" Ana Lucia asked, her voice almost a whisper. "It's the final phase, Internal Affairs Officer," Vance replied. "The arrest of the system. Those who refuse to see the light will now see the darkness." The helicopter lights fixed on specific points: the presidential palace, Congress, the Supreme Court, headquarters of ministries and regulatory agencies. There were no shots, no explosions, just the imposing, overwhelming presence of military force. And then a radio transmission invaded all frequencies in the capital, overriding all stations, all communications. It was Vance's voice, calm and firm, broadcast to every home, every car, every cell phone. "Citizens of this country," she began, "the system that promised to serve you has failed. It became corrupt, a parasite. Today that era ends. There will be no more impunity. There will be no more shadows. From this moment, power returns to the hands of the people. Those who betrayed your trust will be held accountable. This is Operation Rescue. This is the purification." Ana Lucia watched, paralyzed, as special teams descended ropes from the helicopters, invading the buildings, not with violence but with surgical precision. There was no resistance. Paranoia had already done its work, corroding the will to fight. The big fish the general so desperately wanted were now just fish in a broken aquarium. Vance's call was cut. Ana Lucia remained at the window, watching the scene unfold. The capital was silent, except for the sound of the rotors, and Vance's voice still echoing in the streets. Silent Storm was no longer silent. It was a roar of transformation. She felt a mixture of horror and a strange admiration. Vance had achieved what no one dared to dream. She had dismantled the empire of corruption, not with laws and processes, but with fear, strategy, and finally, an unquestionable display of force. The general called, his voice now a thread of panic. "Ana Lucia, what's happening? Who's in charge?" Ana Lucia closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of history on her shoulders. "General," she said, her voice firm, "I think Colonel Vance is in charge now, and she's rebuilding the country her way." The Inspector General, who had felt like a piece on the chessboard, now saw the entire board being overturned. The battle for the country's soul wasn't just beginning. It had reached its climax, and a new dawn, brutal and uncertain, was about to rise from the ruins of the old. Ana Lucia knew that her role, and everyone's role, was about to change drastically. The era of Silent Storm had ended, and the era of Vance's reconstruction was only just beginning, and she, the Internal Affairs Officer, was at the epicenter of a world that would never be the same. The rain continued to fall, washing away not just the streets, but also the old promises and ancient lies. The war helicopter, once a symbol of personal vengeance,